Mama don't come here. Are we on? We already started?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you were.
No, it's okay. We should have started anyway. A few minutes ago. I just need to get a little drink of water and settle. I tell you, I keep thinking I'm doing much, much better, and every other day I get a call from a doctor or a nurse or somebody. Now they want to do something else. And they couldn't wait till Thursday to tell me this because I told them I have an appointment Thursday morning with y'all. And they said, oh yeah, we know, but we want to have this set up before you come in. And then they're going to explain to you what it is and why. And I said, I know what it is, and I got a feeling I know why. But apparently, in my mind, I'm better than what they say I am. But we want to continue. We're doing just a short study, like I said, probably maybe six, 7 weeks. I'm not sure. It was set for 8. But we're dealing with the thought of developing a life that glorifies God, that while we're here living. And it really should be the goal of every believer, that we live on this earth in a way that whatever we're doing, wherever we're doing it, God is getting glorified in our behaviors, our actions, or whatever the case may be. Now, last week we looked at the concept, or we looked at the thought of being a spiritual example here on the earth, of living out the spiritual example. We really didn't get far in that lesson because we had a lot of conversation that went on in it. But tonight we want to deal with the issue of personal integrity. And again, this is another one of those areas where, most pastors don't touch on it as much or speak about it as much. If you want, either through your gadgets or your Bibles, just slide over to Matthew chapter 5, because that will cover. I'm trying to set scriptures in the same book at least, so that when we go through each part, like part 1, we can do everything right out of Matthew 5. Although I've got outside of Matthew, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got 7 other passages that we could turn to, but Matthew would do the job. Particularly Matthew 5 in this case does this whole first part of our lesson. But let me just lay out very quickly 3 things we'll look at tonight as dealing with personal integrity, and that is that to live this life that glorifies God, we will commit ourselves to live in a manner that inspires trust and confidence. Secondly, we're going to deal with the fact that concerning bearing the fruit of the Spirit, and in our third portion, dealing with seeking to manifest the character of Christ in all of our behavior. And again, the bold print is personal integrity, and that's what we're dealing with. So let's get started and let's begin with the concept of the point on trust and confidence. Now, according to the Word of God, as believers, as Christians, we should be trustworthy, dependable, and a person of our word. Now, many of us, whether here or those at home, following at home, many of us may know people that are not like this, but as a believer, this is how we should be. We should be, again, I want to focus on that, trustworthy, dependable, and a person of the word. There is nothing worse, particularly in the dependability, there is nothing worse than commitments to be made and then last minute cancels. Now, I'm not throwing stones at nobody. I'm just saying that I don't have to deal with this that much because my wife does. But I know it's very stressful when she sets something up and then all of a sudden, you know, all the people who's going to be involved that committed themselves to it, you know, for whatever reason can't, or can't get there in time, can't do it, or whatever the case may be. Believers, we need to be better than that. We need to be dependable. Now, it's not that at times things don't happen. Things happen to me, and I understand that, you know. But we need to make sure, how did I get caught in this? We need to make sure that if we have a viable reason for not being dependable that day, that's okay. But if we just changed our mind and decide not to tell nobody, that's different. Now look at Matthew 5 and look at verse 37. I got to find it in this Bible. I study in one Bible and I look at it in another Bible. Yeah, we just look at 37 here because we're going to go right back up in this a minute ago. But watch it. What does Christ say to us here? He says, let your what?
Word. Yes be yes.
Let your word yes be yes. Remember, 3 things: trustworthy, dependable, person of your word. You know, if I give you my word, I'm going to do everything in my power to keep that word. If I don't keep my word, something happened to me that really restricted me from keeping my word. But he goes on in verse 37, he says, and let your no be no. Now, what's it say for the rest of that verse? Because I think it's interesting.
Anything more than that is from the evil one.
That's powerful. Huh? Is that what yours says? No. That's good. Yeah, no, that's a good translation. Or a good take from that. Because they can't hear you on the south side. Our sister said, wavering in your thoughts, is, you know, where it says anything beyond that is evil. And we do know that wavering in your thoughts is not good. So if it's not good is bad. But now because this is how we should be, the swearing of oaths, and it used to be, I don't know if we still stand on this or not, but I remember years ago, this was a big issue in the Church of God. I remember one of the General Assemblies, it was a big thing. We debated and discussed, and we came to our decision, and it got into that, which I didn't understand why we did it all after I found out some things about our practical commitments, that they're not a test for membership, meaning if you break the practical commitments, doesn't mean you can't be a member of the Church of God. But we spent like 3 days on this one thing of the swearing of oaths and joining organizations. This was not one of them, but this is one I can say, like the Masons, because they have their private their private ceremonies, and they, at some level, I don't know the levels of the Masons, but at some level, they're not even allowed to speak whatever it is they do when they do what they do, and the way they do it. And actually, I do remember that they tried to fight on, and this is going back now. This is going back in the 90s. I think it was in 94, 92. Where we go in 92? To Louisiana? Yeah, because that's when we first got here. We went to Louisiana that year. And we went to Texas after that. So it was 94 that did all this happen. And I remember the big fight was the unions back at that time. And they were trying to say that the unions had all these private things that you were to take oath, swear an oath to them. Now, I don't know about that. I've never been in the unions. I don't know if they did that or not. But I do remember that the Church of God used to be real strong on this point, but not the way that we developed it then. But as a believer, according to the Scriptures, the swearing of oath is contrary to our trustfulness as a believer. It's contrary and should be avoided. Now look, back to Matthew 5, and go back to verse 34. No, you know what? Go to verse 33, because Christ says something, and he does this several times in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. I think 3 times straight back to back in Matthew 5. But notice what he says at verse 33. Again, you have what? Heard that. Whenever, and if you read Matthew 5, 6, and 7, and not only should we read it, it should be our law. Because this is the command of Christ. This is the law of Christ. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7. Then it's a shorter version over in Luke. But in Matthew, several times he makes this statement. There's another statement he makes. It is written. When he says it is written, he's going straight to what the law of God was, as interpreted. Whenever you see here, he says, you have heard. And notice here he says, again, you have heard, because he's already said it a couple times, that you have heard. Verse 27, which, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But then he explains what it means in reality to commit adultery. In other words, he says, it's not what you heard. This is what it is. And that's what he does here again in verse 33. He says, you have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform your oaths through the Lord. But, he says, in verse 34 moving, he said, I say unto you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or one hair black. And that's when he goes into that really leads to the meaning of verse 37. I can tell you, I remember this, 1977. And after I gave my heart to the Lord, and I was still going through court proceedings and all, I hadn't been sentenced yet. And I don't know how I got to know this. My wife didn't tell it to me. Somebody in the prison, in the jail, had communicated it to me. But I was a new convert. I didn't really know a whole lot. I knew nothing. Not that I didn't know a whole lot. I knew only what my wife had taught me that I really knew. And I remember being convinced that when you go, every time you go to court, you take the stand, you had to raise your right hand, and you had to swear. Now they say affirm. They didn't say affirm then. They said, do you swear to tell the truth? You had to put your hand on the Bible. And I was convinced by persuasion, if I did that, I was going to hell. Because that's what they were saying. That's what Christ was saying. That's not what Christ was saying at all. And I do like the affirm thing, because I think it's better. I affirm. And so we didn't say we affirm when I would get ready to take the stand, because I had 11 trials. I had 11 court appearances on one case, and we kept going back and forth and back and forth. But every one I had to take the stand, and every one they would do that, and every one I would say, I'm saying yes. That's my yes. Because that's all I knew how to say it. He said, let your yes be yes. So I told him, I'm not swearing. I'm just telling you, yes. That's my yes. And then I'd sit down. And I really never got to tell much truth because me and the Commonwealth attorney got in a lot of arguments. Actually, so many, I shouldn't say this, but it happened. We got in so many arguments, and we had the same judge every time. And me and him got in so many arguments, talking about each other's mother, talking about, he'd say something about my mother, and I'd say something about his mother. I mean, we got ready to fight like 6 or 7 times that we was going, he was coming at me and I was going to him. So bad that the judge had threatened to put both of us in isolation for a week. I mean, the Commonwealth attorney and me, he told the Commonwealth attorney, you don't stop now, I'll put both of you in isolation, which is not a pleasant place to be. But I shouldn't have told you. Let me get back to this. What is your take on this? How do you feel on this? About the oath swearing part? Because that's really what it's all about. I mean, if you swear to something, what are you saying? What does it mean to swear to it?
That you're going to do it.
But is that a bad thing?
Not that you're going to do it.
It might not be bad, but it's not unnecessary.
It's like making a promise.
Yeah. Because the problem with swearing something is a person that's going to do it doesn't need to swear because they're going to do it, and a person that's not going to do it will swear and not do it anyway. It doesn't matter.
Well, I'm just enjoying your take on this aspect. If swear to us carries that meaning of I'm promising I'm going to do something, why would Christ say that's wrong? Wait a minute, what'd you say, hon?
So you should already be committed to instead of, verbally.
You should already be committed to that point instead of saying it? Okay.
Is that what it meant back then, what we think of it as today?
That's exactly where I was going. The thing to do is look up and find out what it means for Christ to say swear versus what we say swear. And I guarantee you there's a difference. And I'm also going to tell you I didn't do it. Because I just thought of that when I was sitting here. So, but it's an interesting thought. Because for Christ to say, let your yes be yes, but that's the same thing as saying I'm making a promise. I promise you, I'm going to tell you the truth. We don't use the word swear too much unless we're swearing in the sense of cussing or something. We use that word more along, somebody cussing. We say, boy, they swear like crazy, versus making a pledge or making a commitment into something. But one of the things I know that Christ means in this is that, our commitment should not be made by anything but our word, whether that word is yes or no. Our commitment shouldn't be made by heaven, in the sense of, I swear by heaven, I'm going to do this. No, that's not necessary. I guarantee you I'm going to do this. That's my word. And it's the same thing. Now, because we should be trustworthy, dependable, and a person of our word, we should avoid getting caught. And that's what I think the Church of God came to later, is getting caught up in whether conversations or getting caught up in organizations or different groups where we had to make secret oaths that we couldn't share with anybody, particularly if they were against or violated biblical principles. You get that? You understand that? And I can't think of any Christian-type organization that would develop an oath that you had to swear by that would violate the Word of God. So, and then you'd be told you can't tell nobody you made this commitment. You can't tell nobody you did this type thing. And but Christ just simply says, you know, and I guess it's easier to live that way. Instead of getting caught up in all this kind of stuff, if you're going to say yes, say yes. If you're going to say no, say no, and let that be the end of it. That finishes it off. Now, another thing we learn here in Matthew 5 is how that by precept and example, Christ teaches us something here. Slide over to what verse I want. I'm jumping through different places. Over into the 40s, up around 43, where he teaches us by precept and example two things. One, we should love our enemies. And secondly, we should prefer our brothers or sisters, whatever the case may be. But look at verse 43 and look how that verse starts again. You have heard. So that tells me whatever they heard was trash. But what he's about to say is gospel. And he said, you heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. Where did that even come from? It just came from what the old people said. But he looks and says, but I say unto you. And I like that phrase. He says it a lot through these. I always look at that phrase in the sense of, you have heard that it was said, but now I want you to hear what I'm saying. Because what I'm saying is what matters. What was said was junk. If it wasn't, he doesn't need to correct it. You heard it was said, but I say means he's correcting something. So what is his correction? You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. But I'm telling you to love your enemies. Who's that? Uh-huh. Who's our enemies?
Oh, well, the world system, the devil.
So we're supposed to love that?
We're supposed to love the people, not what they do.
Exactly. You love the people, but not the activities or the behavior. But he goes on, he says, bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Pray for those. I know a lot of believers that would spend every day at an altar if they really, if they read that on a daily basis. Because I don't know. Look, I've been a pastor for 40 years. I've been a minister for 40 years. This isn't easy. But he ends it says in verse 44, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Love your enemies, and even beyond the systems and all. An enemy is basically somebody that's bent on doing you harm, doing you wrong. That's the atmosphere, that's the attitude of an enemy. Like right now, Russia is the enemy of the Ukraine. Russia has a plan on what they're trying to do. We don't know what that is yet, but, whatever it is, it's something to force Ukraine into a different lifestyle, a different way of behaving. Now, you want to know one of the amazing things, and I've seen this, and I know this I've looked at this to make sure. One of the amazing things about this Russian invasion is just prior to it beginning, the president of Russia made the statement that this is because the Ukraine has departed from the Russian Orthodox Christian Church. They left the church. That's why we're angry with them. That's his excuse back then. That's amazing. That's how the enemy hides itself. They're coming, act like they're coming on your ground. Or, you left the church and never left it in your life, but you've left the teachings because of the way you live, stuff like that. And they're bent on doing you wrong. They're bent on doing you harm. And, if you look at all the other things that he says there in verse 44, every bit of that's people against you. All of it's your enemies. But now look at verse 45. He tells us why to do this. That you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. For he makes his sun, S-U-N, rise on the evil and the good. He sends rain on the just and the unjust. And then Christ says something to you, and I guarantee you, if nothing else got their attention, what he says now does. Watch this. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? There's several ways of translating what he says next. The King James says, do not even the publicans do that. When he said that, he had their attention. Why?
It was the most hated profession.
And what was that profession? They collected taxes from the Jews for Rome, but they always increased the amount so that their percentage grew, and they would tax you more so they could keep more, and then they would give Rome, or the Roman group, the portion that rightly belonged to them, and they would keep theirs. Well, Christ uses that phrase, he's got your attention. And so it's like, how can you compare me to them? And he says, if this is all you do, that's all they do. They basically, according to this, they basically love those who they love those who love them. And then he goes on, verse 46, and if you greet your brothers only, what do you more than others? And again, he throws it at them. Do not even the tax collectors do this? And see, this is where, and we could go real deep on that tax collector thing, but this is where the knowledge, even some knowledge of the cultural assumptions of that day. Knowing these things, you can really get a deeper meaning out of Scripture. You know, I know for years and years and years, the church in the Western world read those scriptures with King James Bibles, the word publicans, and didn't have a clue what that meant. Now, if I don't have a clue what the words mean, how am I ever going to understand what the word is saying to me? The Lord is basically saying, two things. If you just love those that love you, well, you're just the same as this group that you hate so much over here. If you only greet your brothers, and that phrase, not explained there, but the phrase greet your brothers, that is, and you still see it to this day, they greet each other with a kiss on the cheek, double kiss. They do a double kiss, not a single kiss. Single kiss came from Judas, and that's called the kiss of death. The Italian group adopted that in their way of living. If you got kissed on the cheek, but not the other side, you know, they was about, your life was short. Huh? Huh?
Said you're getting whacked.
Yeah, you're about to get whacked. Your life is short. Get things right with God. But man, where we at? Well, we got into some stuff on this. In verse 48, therefore you shall be perfect, which is mature, just as your Father in heaven is perfect. So he starts out with, and again, he's saying that by precept and example, he is showing us and teaching us that we love our enemies, we prefer our brother or sister, whatever the case may be. But the point behind telling us that is that we can have a lifestyle that mirrors our Father in heaven. Why? Because our Father in heaven loves his enemies. Our Father in heaven greets the brethren. And Christ says, you be like him. When this characteristic is shown, people will take note of you. But not only did Christ teach us about that love part, but we should always, when it comes to trust and confidence, we should always behave in such a way that will point other people to Christ. And I think if any place, back to chapter 5, but slide back to verse 16. I think if any area where we come up short in, once we get out of the church, once we get out amongst the world, on our jobs, whatever it is, it's in this area here. And the reason is, in many cases, not all, but the lack of personal integrity. Because when we get on the job and we get in the other places, many people are different than what they are in church. They talk different, they behave different. Our behavior should always be consistent, and it should always be pointing other people to Christ. So verse 16 says, let your light so shine before men. Again, this is Christ speaking. He says, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good deeds or your good behavior, your good works. And notice what happened. And what are they going to do? Glorify your Father which is in heaven. Now, Now, something important about this statement here, where it said, see your good works. That phrase tells me something, and that is, effort is required. It takes work to do this. It's not going to just do it itself. It's not going to do it because we can quote that verse of Scripture because it's one of those favorite verses we all have. If he says something about works, we all know what work means. Putting forth effort. Doing something to get something done. And what are we doing? We are letting our light shine, which is leading people to Christ, or hopefully leading people to Christ. And we're doing it in such a way that those people will see our efforts. And out of that, they will glorify God. Regardless of what they think about it all, they still glorify God. And I've seen that a lot in my life. People that don't accept the Lord, they acknowledge that God exists. They acknowledge that Christ was his son. They don't accept him as a Savior. But they acknowledge that some of the lifestyles they have visualized, they acknowledge that person has God in their life. Now I remember when I came into the Church of God. And we went to the mall one time, and I had a lot of problems with a lot of the teachings of the Church of God when I came in. And we went to the mall one time, and there was these three ladies in front of us. They had these long black dresses on, all the way down to here, all the way down to the heel of their boots. You guys remember that look? No makeup, no nothing. And they were walking out. We was with my mother-in-law, and she looked at me. She said, "Son," and I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Do you want to see holy people?" And I said, "Well, sure." She said, "That's holiness right there. That's the goal right there." Now, I noticed my mother-in-law wasn't wearing this long black dress and stuff, but, she was dressed cool, but not like that. And I'll never forget, as we got closer to them, and you could hear them talking, and I mean, they were downgrading every human being. And I guess they were starting with their church, and then they got to their pastor's wife, and then they got off on, this person and that person. And I looked at my mother-in-law and I said, "That's holiness? That's what we do?" And Mom said, No. She said, "That's fake holiness. That's phony holiness. That's dress-up holiness. That's not what we do. Holiness is in our heart." And I thought, well, good, because I've always felt that way anyway. I never did think the clothes made the holiness. I always thought the holiness made the person, but not the clothes made it. Or the absence of makeup, which I just never understood taking place. Now, not only do we need to live a life that inspires trust and confidence. I'm thinking which one I should do because I'm not getting through both of these. Well, I'll do this one. The second point is concerning the fruit of the Spirit, but if we do the third, we have to do the second. And the fruit of the Spirit is basically the fact that if we live in the Spirit, then we should, by that fact, manifest fruit. And I want to explain fruit very quickly, just saying attitudes and actions of the Spirit. That's what we should be living by. If we live in the fruit of the Spirit, we should be manifesting that fruit, manifesting the attitude, manifesting the actions of the Spirit, and not fulfilling the lust of the flesh. So I just want to say that much on that. But I want to talk about the character of Christ aspect, because we just spent some time on, you know, the importance of what book we're going to look at. Slide over to John chapter 13. We'll look at some verses in John now, under this guideline of character of Christ. But in John's writings, and it's in a lot of his writings, it's in his gospel, it's in his first epistle. One thing we learn is that, and we learn it with what Christ just said in Matthew, and that is that love for others is the hallmark of the Christ life, or even the Christ-like life. Now, this is not easy. Again, there are some people we'd rather not be around. There are some people we'd rather not have around and stuff like that. But here's the question that I gauge everything I try to do by. Would Christ do this? I don't do that. What would Christ do? I do what did Christ do in this case. You know, what did he do when he was in a house, or even had the audacity to enter a house that was filled with these tax collectors and sinners? Not only does he go in the house, he sits down and eats with them. And all them of old, if you read the story, they come in and they throw a spasm. How can he do this? Now, you notice they never say nothing to Christ about it. They say to the disciples, how can your teacher sit here? I don't know about you. If I knew that an individual was in the process of setting me up to where my life was going to come to an end in a couple of days because of the behavior of this one person. If it's not for this one person's actions, it doesn't happen now. It might happen later, but it don't happen now. If I know there's somebody in my midst that's going to do that, I don't know how easy I could sit down and eat with them. And see, what we don't understand because of, what's the artist's name that painted the Mona Lisa? Mona. And The Last Supper? Da Vinci, yeah. I don't know where he got his idea from, but anybody in their right mind knows they were not sitting in chairs like that to start with. They didn't have them like that in them days. In them days, they sat on the ground. It was more like the Orientals, sitting on pillows and stuff like that. And the table would have been extremely low. And it would have been that starting at one corner, the disciples would have started, you know, a way around the table. We know that John, not Mary Magdalene, was on this side of Christ. He sat in a seat of privilege. And that's why Peter was so upset, because Peter, as I understand it, Peter was down at the end. And so that's why Peter's upset about John and Jesus getting a little close over here. You know, I should be getting close over there. But Judas is here. which is not a seat of privilege to be on the left side, but it was a place of honor. Christ takes the man that's going to deny him and calls him all the activity that's coming over the next couple of days, and he sets him in the place of high honor. I don't know if I could do that. Could you?
He was loving his enemy.
Huh?
He was loving his enemy.
I don't think in the natural we can do it, no. We have to do it through Christ. We have to,
Well, Christ did it in the natural.
exception to the rule.
Yeah.
So then,
But if the whole class is on, we have to live like him and be like him. We have to do it. We'll have a choice. We may not want to.
no, you have a choice. No. Yeah, don't ever think we don't have a choice. We choose what we're going to do. Whether it's sin or righteousness, we choose. You know, I despise the fact that somebody made me do it. No, you chose to do it. They might have helped persuade you, but you chose to do it. But and I don't want to get off my point, but and my point is this fact that love is the hallmark. When I just love for others. And in this case, it doesn't necessarily mean just those that are your enemies and all. Because remember, he had John on his right. And according to John's writings, John is the apostle he loved. But he has Judas on his left. And we know, according to their behaviors, that was a seat of honor. Because there's nobody past that. See, they're all sitting around in this half circle, or like a letter J actually would have been. But there's nobody on this end up, or this end up here. They're all coming around this way. Judas is the end of the line. This is the guy that's getting ready to turn Christ in. He knows it. So what does he do? He offers to feed him. He takes some bread and he lays it in there. I'm not sure exactly what they use. My guess has always been some kind of olive oil. If you go into a lot of Italian restaurants, one of the best things you can get is the Italian butter, which is nothing but oil. And they just bring you a little plate of oil and bread, and you just wipe the bread in it and eat it. And that's what Christ and them did. I don't know what he used in that sop, let's say. But I do know that he put forth the effort to dip it. And it wasn't just to reveal who was going to betray him. Because only one person knew that's what he was doing. And who was that? No. One of the disciples knew what he was doing when he did that. John. The rest of them wouldn't have heard that conversation. Jesus, who's it going to be? It's going to be the guy I dip bread with and give it to him. That's who it's going to be. What I like to see, or what I would like to see, is John's response when it went to the guy in the seat of honor. Because John had a problem. And that was he was a petty anti-politician. Him and his brother both. You remember when they came to Christ and said, when you come into the kingdom, let me sit on one side. And Jimmy said, let me sit on the other side. And Christ told him, and the guy said, they brought Mama in. And Mama said, Lord, when you get to your kingdom, let my boys there. And that, Jimmy and Johnny, put one on one side, put one on the other side when you come in your kingdom. And Christ said, okay. And you know what? He did it. He did it. How did he do it? He honored their request. Who was the first apostle to be killed? Stephen wasn't an apostle, he was a disciple. This guy had his head cut off. James, Acts chapter 12. So watch. Christ goes up. He goes to establish his kingdom. Here, James is the first apostle put to death, the first to die. John lives to be a full 120 years old, according to history. He was the last one to die. One on this side, one on that side. He did it. That was just extra. But as I was saying, love for others is the hallmark of the Christ-like. And this is something that we should be working on constantly. I only got 3 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to read. Well, we're at John 13 already, aren't we? Look at verse 34 and 35. A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. Notice verse 35. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Now, thank God it's not today. Well, let me say it this way. I thank God it's not in breakthrough today. I don't know if it exists in other congregations, but I've been in a lot of churches where if you wanted to be loved by the people in the church, you were better being a sinner than a saint sitting in that congregation, because they were fighting all the time on different grounds. People hating each other and despising each other and whatever the case. Christ didn't say that to show anybody anything. He said your love for one another. I mean, what's the thing that excites us the most about Christ? He loved us. God, he loved us. In spite of. So, let me say these quickly, and I'll give you some scriptures next week on it. But when it comes to Christ, in his relationship with the Father, Christ did three things. He displayed submission. He displayed submission in his relationship to the Father. Now, I want to tell you a secret. If Christ displayed submission to the Father in his relationship, I guarantee you we should be doing that too. When it came to his relationship with others, he demonstrated three things. That was acceptance in John 8:11. He demonstrated compassion in Matthew 9:36. And I'm just giving you one verse for each. And he demonstrated forgiveness. Matthew 9, verse 2. That's Christ. You know, I told you, well, I tell everybody, when I first got established in ministry, got my ministerial feet, so to speak, the first thing my wife and I did, and I guess it was because of, a whole lot of my background and a whole lot of her background. The first thing we ever came agreement to in ministerial work was the fact that we would practice love, acceptance, and forgiveness to anybody. And I have tried, and I hope I have not failed, I have tried to live that for 40-some years. And I think it's a good thing to live. I think that's the life that shows others the life of Christ. We love them, we accept them, we forgive them. We don't accept what they do, we said that earlier. And I tell them, look, I accept you, I don't accept this behavior. I'm not being a part of this behavior because I don't accept the behavior. But I do accept you because Christ accepted me. I don't think he was real pleased with my behavior, but he was excited about me. And so should we be. Amen? I hope this helps some. Catherine, we'll go ahead and finish. You can click us off. Thank you for being with us online.